G'day, welcome to Digital Pill. My name is Joe Dolce, and I'm going to talk about poetry and lyrics, the difference between the two, and creating songs from poems rather than setting poems to music. What's the difference between a poem and a lyric? Well, for me, it's good to have a definition because they're two separate art forms. A poem for me works on the page first and on the page last. You don't have to hear it. You don't have to have a performance of it. You don't need to hear music with it. It's just words and page and space. Lyrics, on the other hand, 90% of the time fail without the accompaniment or the performance aspect. Most of the singer-songwriters today are lyricists. There's only one poet that I can think of who's fairly well established, and that's Leonard Cohen. He started as a poet 11 years before he wrote his first song. He had 2 books of poems published, and over the years he's emerged more as a songwriter than a poet, but his early poems are quite astounding. I'll read you one in a minute. So let's say then poetry works on the page without anything else. Lyrics need something to make them work. There's then light verse, which fall in between somewhere. Light verse is lyrics that actually can work as poetry somewhat. And the best way to show that in example is to take something from the 17th century. It's called Cocaine Lil. Now, no one knows what the music this is, but it goes like this. Did you ever hear about Cocaine Lil? She lived in Cocaine Town on Cocaine Hill. She had a cocaine dog and a cocaine cat, and they fought all night with the cocaine rat. Well, that sounds like a lyric, but it's actually a poem. It's in between. And here is a setting of it, or a song I created out of it for an album that I put out recently called The Wind Cries Mary. It reminded me of a Bo Diddley kind of rhythm, so I created a Bo Diddley beat. It goes like this. Did you ever hear about Cocaine Lil? She lived in Cocaine Town on Cocaine Hill. Had a cocaine dog and a cocaine cat. Well, they fought all night with the cocaine rat. So light verse, lyrics, they're very close to each other. The best example of a person who wrote down lyrics before he set them to music was Woody Guthrie. He used to type out all his songs and then he'd set them to music. So in the pop songwriters today have Bob Dylan, let's see, there's Paul Kelly in Australia, and Nick Cave. I would call them all lyricists, lyric writers. Leonard Cohen, I would say, is the only poet because he had a different discipline when he began, and to some degree it still exists. I'd like to read you a poem of Leonard Cohen's now from his second book of poetry called The Spice Box of the Earth. This book was put out 6 years before his first recording, and it's one of my favorite of his poems. It's called As the Mist Leaves No Scar. As the mist leaves no scar on the dark green hill, so my body leaves no scar on you, nor ever will. When wind and hawk encounter, what remains to keep? So you and I encounter, then turn, then fall to sleep. As many nights endure without a moon or star, so will we endure when one is gone and far. I'd like to talk now about the difference between setting poetry to music and creating a song out of a poem. There's a distinction. Anybody can set a poem to music. You basically take a poem and you put notes under it and sing it. And a lot of classical composers do this all the time. They do it with 12-tone sequences. They do it with very avant-garde things. But, usually they don't stick in your mind because unless the writer has a gift for writing a song, you don't want to sing these things, right? Now, creating a song from a poem is totally different. That's very close to translating almost, taking it from one language into another. Now, a lot of times that doesn't work with poems, but in the case of Cavafy, I only came to Cavafy's poems through English translations. He wrote in Greek originally, and he influenced people like T.S. Eliot and Dorothy Porter and people like that, only in English translation. So to create a song from a poem, to me, is a kind of translation. If it succeeds, you can actually bring the poem to people who may never have understood it or even heard it in the first place, and it should stand on equal ground. Let's give you an example. This is a poem by a pre-Christian writer, wrote around 7 BC, named Sappho. The poem goes like this. Tonight I've watched the moon and then the Pleiades go down. The night is now half gone. Youth goes. I'm in bed alone. Now what I've done with this particular poem is I've repeated some of Sappho's lines to create it a bit more musical, but I believe I've kept the original intention. They say Sappho actually used to sing these to harp playing, but there's no record of any of the music. Tonight I'll watch the moon and then the Pleiades go down. The night is now half gone. My youth goes. The night is now half gone. Youth goes. I am in bed alone. The night is now half gone. Youth goes. I am in bed alone, alone. I hope some of that stuff was helpful, and it's very helpful to me to actually talk about it because there's not a lot out there on this subject. If you're interested in more, go back to the website DigitalPill.TV and follow some of the links, and you can probably find my website and some of my songwriter workshops where I'm talking about this theme more in depth. Thanks for joining us today.